Did you know that standardized tests are not as helpful and accurate as many believe them to be? After having researched and written a paper on the disadvantages of standardized tests, I have learned just how disadvantageous using standardized test scores as a baseline for student success is. During my speech, I will explain the problems related to standardized testing, the solution to this problem, and persuade you that standardized testing should not be the primary measurement of success. There are many problems with using standardized tests as a baseline measurement of success for students. Some of these include it covers few skills. Many students suffer from test anxiety, which affects their test scores greatly, despite the knowledge that they may know. It creates a less rounded education. Many times it tests on irrelevant information, and it leads to teachers teaching the test rather than teaching material that the students actually need to know. According to Holly Painter in her Pros and Cons of Standardized Tests article from the Oxford Learning website, standardized tests typically measure a few core subjects like reading, writing, and math, which limits the broader picture of education. These tests focus on specific skills that are in fact important, but many times it misses the other valuable skills that students may have. Students aren't using knowledge of the subject rather than test-taking strategies. When it's time to take the test, students prepare by studying strategies and not learning more about the subject, which then leads teachers to teaching the test rather than the material that students actually need. According to Hilary Fan in her article, A Student's Perspective on Test Anxiety, published on the University of California School of Mental Health website, it is estimated that 40 to 60% of students have test anxiety. And this test anxiety limits a student's success on these tests. And much of this anxiety comes from the strong emphasis that people make on the tests. Smart students can do poorly despite knowing whatever material they're being tested on just because of test anxiety, while a student who doesn't have test anxiety cannot know the information at all, but can take the test well and get a good score simply because they know test-taking strategies. According to Becky Gillett in her article, An Uptick on Vocational Training from Mississippi Business Journal website, 75% of Gen Z students in Mississippi specifically are more interested in trade school rather than traditional college. And trade school programs typically do not require core curriculum classes such as math, reading, writing, those type of classes, which are what students are tested on in standardized testing. Many vocational programs actually thrive better off of practical skills than that standardized tests do not measure and do not prepare a student for. Now that we know the true disadvantages of standardized testing, how do we better measure a student's skills and intellectual understanding? Getting rid of standardized tests is not the answer. There are many other ways that should be used to assess a student's knowledge and skills past just the core subjects that standardized tests test on. According to R.D. Merritt's article, Non-Graded Instruction, published on EBSCO Knowledge Advantage website, portfolio, performance, and exhibition assessments are three very helpful alternatives. Portfolio assessments assess a student's set of works. So many times people think of this as art, but this could also include various skills. It does not have to be just artwork. And one of the benefits to a portfolio assessment is being able to see substantial growth from the very beginning of the works to the very end of the works, and not just through a good test result. Performance assessments show the process and completion of a product and allow students to demonstrate their skill or their knowledge in a subject area. This shows how a student operates and is helpful for knowing what professions a student will be best at based on how they operate. An exhibition assessment is similar to performance, but this allows students to publicly show what they've learned and demonstrate the process. An exhibition assessment allows for hands-on demonstration of a skill or subject, which is good for kinesthetic learners and people who learn better when they're doing hands-on activities. All of these assessments are much better alternatives than standardized testing, because rather than memorizing something or just learning a test strategy, you actually learn the information and obtain the information for longer periods. Danita Harris and Lindsay Lothrop's article, The System of Education Assessment Should Move Away from Required Standardized Testing, published in EBSCO's Point of View reference source website, says that alternative methods such as formative assessments could and should be used to ensure students get a well-rounded education. These alternative assessments give students better, well-rounded educations. It allows teachers to focus on more practical skills, such as the ones that are needed for vocational or trade school. Teachers are able to focus on these practical skills, not just teaching the test. Students are able to be assessed in less stressful environments, which reduces test anxiety. Students are also able to perform their best in more practical ways. And then lastly, educators can better see the growth process through alternative assessments. Now that you've heard the problems related to standardized testing, alternative testing methods, and the benefits of these alternatives, I hope this broadens your view on education and how the baseline for success of a student should be found. While standardized tests have a few benefits, using alternative assessments for a more well-rounded education provides a more accurate view of a student's true potential and success. Now is the time to redefine success and potential for students with the help of alternative assessments rather than strictly using standardized tests as a baseline for success.